I really hate clickbait, and I usually go pretty much as far out of my way as I can to avoid it. But when I saw this article, 16 plot holes and inconsistencies in the Star Wars saga, I just thought, hey, I'll check it out. I'll see. Maybe I'll learn something. Maybe I should give this a chance. Of course, this list is pretty much entirely bullshit, and today I'm going to go through and tell you guys why. Since we've got 16 items on the list, I'm going to break it up into two parts. Today we're going to go through 16 to 10, and then in my next video, we're going to go from 10 to 1. And I just want to preface this by saying that the person who wrote this list claims to be an Uber fan. Well, Miss Jessica Spinelli, you should be ashamed of yourself. Number 16. Why doesn't anyone recognize C-3PO and R2-D2? And this has got to be one of the dumbest ones on the entire list. This author often fails to realize that the Star Wars galaxy is millions of planets large and that there are probably tens of trillions, if not more, droids in the entire galaxy. That's like asking, hey, why didn't you recognize that one car that you were in before? 18 years ago. I mean, R2-D2, for example, is a blue astromech droid. And people probably go their entire lives in the Star Wars universe seeing hundreds and hundreds of astromech droids. That's like asking me, again, getting back to the car analogy, how come I didn't recognize that, blue Honda Civic that drove down the street the other day? The author also claims that at the beginning of A New Hope, which takes place 15 minutes after Rogue One, which they are correct about, that C-3PO and R2-D2 don't seem to know each other. I don't understand what you're claiming. Of course they know each other. They almost seem like they're friends or maybe frenemies, They've certainly got a rapport going, so I don't know why they would suggest that they don't know each other. And I mean, literally 5 minutes into A New Hope, C-3PO says, R2-D2, where are you? That's not a droid that doesn't know who R2-D2 is. Come on, guys. Also, further to my earlier point, one of the very first scenes in A New Hope is C-3PO and R2-D2 walking down the hallway of the Tantive 4. And what's right behind them? A silver protocol droid. So if that doesn't tell you how prevalent droids are in the universe, I don't know what will. Number 15. How could Anakin have built C-3PO? And this one is also one of the dumber ones on the list. I mean, where does Anakin work at the time of Episode 1? He's in a scrapyard. He didn't build C-3PO from scratch. He didn't take the steel, mold it, put the wiring in. He found what was probably a 75% complete droid. Found some parts from other droids, put them in, fixed everything up, did a bit of wiring, It's very, very impressive, but it's certainly not impossible, especially, he's one of the most impressive characters in the Star Wars franchise. He can fly already, and he can pod race, so maybe the Force gives him a little bit of tech help too, but I still don't think, even if it didn't, that it's impossible. Again, protocol droids are probably one of the most common form of droid in the entire galaxy. He could probably, Google on the HoloNet, how do I build a protocol droid, or, where do I find this part that I need, and he can do it. So it's not that really questionable for me. The author also rightly points out that between Episode 1 and Episode 2, C-3PO was somehow fixed. He got his gold plating on, and where in Episode 1, he was pretty much completely naked. And again, I don't know why the common sense doesn't seem to be flowing here, but we know that Shmi wasn't living by herself, and I mean, even if she was, I don't see why it's impossible that she could do it herself. It's just putting some plating on. But we know that she was sold to Klieg Lars, who is probably using C-3PO as some sort of moisture evaporator droid, just like Uncle Owen eventually would buy him for. So I think it makes perfect sense that if that's what his use is going to be, he's not going to have his innards exposed. I mean, Tatooine is a sandy planet. If he's going to be out, talking to moisture evaporators all day, he should have his plating on. So I don't see why either Klieg couldn't have put it on himself if he's handy, or went to, old Tatooine droid shop and gotten some sort of plating put on for a cost. But for some reason, the only conclusion the author can find is that the mom must have had superhuman robot building skills. So that's the more realistic answer, obviously. Number 14. Luke learns to be a Jedi in just a couple of hours. And this one is refuted, actually, within the text itself, where she recognizes that it probably wasn't a couple of hours. It was at least a few days. And I'm going to suggest that it was more than a few days. It was probably a week, a few weeks. Some people have said up to 6 months. I don't think I believe that. We know that Han and Leia and the crew spent at least a few days running from the Imperial Navy, and we know that they probably spent some time on Cloud City because Leia expressed some frustration over being basically unable to leave. But even if it was just a few days, that doesn't matter because Luke is certainly not a Jedi Knight at this point. He leaves before his training is complete, and Yoda explicitly says that. She asks, how did Luke learn in days what it takes most Jedi Masters their entire lives to learn? Well, he didn't. He gets his ass handed to him by Darth Vader. He loses a hand. He gets one strike in, and he's lucky. Vader toys with him the entire fight, and then once, he gets that hit in the shoulder, he gets serious and he chops his hand off almost immediately. Luke only survived the encounter because he fell down a giant pit and somehow managed to get picked up by the Millennium Falcon. He's not a Jedi. He got his ass kicked. He was able to do a little force jump, again, which is neat, but I can easily see him learning that in a few days or a few hours, especially after, he had the basic level of training by the beginning of Empire Strikes Back. He was able to grab the lightsaber while the Wampa was attacking him, for example. Number 13, who really trained Obi-Wan Kenobi? So this one comes from some line of dialogue in Empire Strikes Back where Obi-Wan asks Yoda, was I any different when you taught me? Basically referring to how Yoda talks about Luke being impatient and whatnot. And she says, well, Obi-Wan was clearly trained by Qui-Gon Jinn. And obviously this is stupid for a few reasons. The first being, just because he was trained by Qui-Gon Jinn and Qui-Gon was his master, doesn't mean he was exclusively trained by Qui-Gon Jinn. And in fact, we know that Yoda has a really heavy role with younglings. We see in Episode 2 and Episode 3 that Yoda actually trains the younglings personally. At the time of Obi-Wan's training, Yoda was also the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, so I'm fairly certain that he probably had a pretty substantial impact in the lives of all young Jedi. And I mean, we see this in Episode 3 directly. When Anakin has an issue, who does he go speak to? When he's worried about Padme dying and how to deal with it, he talks to Yoda. I mean, shit, Yoda probably, taught some classes too. Like, I can imagine everyone sitting in an auditorium listening to Yoda lecture about something. So I think the fact that Yoda taught Obi-Wan, it just, I think that's obvious, and I certainly don't see how this one's a plot hole. Number 12 is, how did Han Solo lose his beloved Millennium Falcon? And I mean, it's a huge galaxy, and this is kind of, again, the problem of the author doesn't understand how big the Star Wars universe is. The Millennium Falcon could have easily been stolen by some greasy character that Han Solo hangs out with, and we know he hangs out with greasy characters because we see 10 minutes after he finds the Falcon, he's, we're introduced to a bunch of thugs that he's had dealings with since Episode 6. Then there's a question of how did he actually find it, and thankfully The Force Awakens novelization explains this, and we get it a little bit in the movie too. Apparently the Falcon had some sort of beacon on it, which his sensors picked up, and he only picked it up because he was lucky enough to be in the system when the ship took off. Which basically also explains why he never found it before now, when the Falcon was being flown, he just wasn't close enough to pick up on the signal. And I mean, the Force works in mysterious ways, and that's kind of the point. That's kind of always been the point. What are the chances that C-3PO and R2-D2 would be sold to the Lars family, where Luke Skywalker is? What are the chances that Alderaan would get blown up and the Millennium Falcon would be captured, causing Luke to save his sister? What are the chances that Anakin, the most powerful Jedi in the entire Star Wars universe, would be found because a ship crash landed on a planet? What are the chances of Rey, who is obviously going to be a very powerful Jedi, would be found on some desolate desert world? Again, the Force directs everything in the Star Wars series, and that's just the way it's always been. Maybe that's a bit of a cop-out, I don't know, but that's what we have with Star Wars. Number 11, and this is going to be the last entry that I cover for this video because I'm just already tired of the dumb clickbait, is how did Anakin learn to become a Force ghost? And I will admit, this is probably the best question that we've got so far. But I mean, there's a very simple answer to this. He's the chosen one. He can do basically whatever he wants, and if the Force wills him to become a Force ghost, then he becomes a Force ghost. I mean, he is one of the most powerful and most talented Force users in the entire galaxy. Just because Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan needed to practice to learn the technique to become a Force ghost does not mean that Anakin Skywalker did. Or perhaps Vader was reading Jedi holocrons between Episode 3 and Episode 6. Presumably, Qui-Gon Jinn acquired this knowledge in some way. It doesn't really stretch the imagination too much to imagine that Vader could have learned it himself. And then she basically asks, well, even if he did learn it somehow, how come Anakin is his young, sexy, hating Christensen self with his poofed up hair, while Obi-Wan and Yoda are all old and decrepit and whatever? And well, Anakin stopped being Anakin when he turned to the dark side. I mean, Palpatine even says that now you're Darth Vader, and that's what happened when Anakin killed all those Jedi. When he turned to the dark side, he stopped being Anakin Skywalker and became Darth Vader. And Obi-Wan kind of uses similar kind of logic to justify why he lied to Luke about Darth Vader being his father. And I mean, she says, if any Jedi could just figure this out, then there would be a whole lot of Jedi Force ghosts all over the damn place. Well, that's not necessarily true, because just because Anakin figured this out does not mean that any Jedi could figure this out, because Anakin is clearly not just an ordinary Jedi. He is the chosen one. So that was the first 6 supposed plot holes and inconsistencies in the Star Wars saga. And I mean, this list isn't good, and it's not going to get any better. And that's really not surprising when you take a look at the reference sources. We have moviepilot.com, cheatsheet.com, Quora.com, screenrant.com, the Huffington Post, Unreality Mag, whatever that is. And I know this is just clickbait, so I don't know why I'm spending time thinking about it, but it's frustrating. So let me know what you guys think. Are these actual misconceptions? Am I looking at things with too forgiving of a lens? Let me know in the comments. I think I'm being pretty fair, and I think that this author is probably just a little not too bright when it comes to Star Wars. That's all I'm going to say. Maybe relied a little too heavy on unrealitymag.com and Yahoo Answers for these inconsistencies. But I mean, you do what you do to get clicks, I guess. Anyways, I'm going to be back maybe this weekend, maybe later in the week, with part 2 of the top 10 Star Wars inconsistencies. And again, it's not going to get any better. I'll see you guys then. May the Force be with you.